Hi, welcome to this interview. We have the CEO of Medworxx company, Mr. Dan Matlow. Mr. Matlow, good day.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I don't know a lot about your company. I got a report here from Chris that told me about that. It's not a domain that I know a lot. And I see that we have about dozens of competitors, and you seems to be one of the smallest one in there. Maybe there is some potential there. So I'd like to know about what you are exactly selling. You have two platforms. You're selling kind of software to hospitals.
Yeah, our core offering plays in the space that we call the hospital patient flow, and we address the hospital market, which is not the home care or not the physician's office, but it's the hospital market that we would address. And patient flow is our core business. We moved into that market as our primary domain with an acquisition that we made in 2008 of what we think of some really unique, powerful IP that was built through a lot of research using clinical criteria, evidence-based guidelines in the formation of the patient flow and the movement of the patient. So although we play in the patient flow market, which is a pretty big market, we think the clinical criteria product, which is very widely used in the Canadian marketplace outside of Quebec, it's 50% of Canada uses it. We just moved into the Quebec marketplace recently with our French-speaking version of the product, and they're starting to see some movement there. You'll see that we've made some movement internationally with it, but we raised some capital a couple years ago, and we've laid low since then to prove out the value of our IP. We think it's very unique IP in an international basis. And we're out here to tell the story because it is really starting to move on an international perspective.
What is differentiating your product as opposed to the other competitor? What makes you special?
We're the only organization that uses what's called evidence-based guidelines. So we've done a fair amount of clinical research on the appropriateness of a patient being in a hospital setting. The biggest cost of a hospital today is the length of stay of a patient in a hospital, but we want to still get quality care. So we produce evidence-paired guidelines that we assess every patient every day to make sure they're appropriate for being in the hospital. If they are, that's great. If they're not, we want to know why. So we look to see if they're clinically stable, and if not, what are the reasons for the delay. So if someone is proven to be clinical stable on day 3 of our software, but they stay for 7 days, there's a 4-day lag. What is that lag, and why is it there?
Is there a big difference in between countries itself? Because here in Quebec and Canada we have free health care, so the longer you stay in hospital, the longer it costs the population.
100%.
So the hospital has all advantage and cut it down the time people stay in hospital, while in the state you pay for all the time you are there.
It's a very interesting question. In the US market, they've been using clinical criteria, evidence-based guidelines since the 90s to help insurance companies to make sure that the hospitals are getting the appropriate stay and the payments are being accurate. Other markets have not used this formation because the criteria in the US marketplace isn't adopted for what we call a single payer system. Medworxx is the first company based in Canada that has a single payer-based system clinical criteria set, and we've been on a mission to prove it that we can sell this internationally.
Okay. Where is your clientele spread right now?
We have a huge Canadian install base. We're provincially in Alberta, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. 50% of Ontario uses it. So we have a very big presence in the Canadian.
50% of the hospital in Ontario are using your product.
Correct.
That's great.
Correct. So we're entrenched in the Canadian marketplace. 2-3 years ago, we moved into the UK, Australia, and then recently into France. UK is a huge opportunity for us as a single payer system. The government has adopted the use of clinical utilization, evidence-based guidelines, and its formation is starting to fund those events. So we're excited about that opportunity.
And so because it's still a lot of countries, and you're quite a small company. Right. You don't have that much revenue, 1-point-some million. In revenue?
That's right. No, we do about 6.5 million, 7 million in revenue.
Oh, 7 million in revenue. Okay. So, but which still not big for attacking such a large market. So where do you put most of your effort right now?
We're proving it on an international market. So the Canadian marketplace is small, so the opportunity for growth isn't there. So we used the Canadian market as a starting point to show the validity of it, and then we've moved international. We sell through consulting companies. Consulting companies use our technology as a form of giving analysis and data to look at process improvements for hospitals to understand patient flow issues. This is as you mentioned, this is a global problem. Length of stay is a major issue and cost within hospitals. So lots of the big consulting companies, the big 6, the big 5 consulting groups are all looking for ways to do process improvement, and our data provides extremely valuable insights into that.
80% of your revenues are generated from annual renewable license. What is your renewable rate?
It's well over 90%. Our clients, once they get used to our software, it's a fair amount of work to implement our solutions, but once it's embedded in the hospitals, the senior executives want access to the data. They want to understand what their flow issues. Our hospitals have seen enormous gains of the use of our software, and our rate is very, very strong.
So what are the reasons behind the decrease in your
we had a decrease in the Q3 quarter, and we mentioned that in our filings in the MD&A and so forth. We had one particular large client on the renewal. It wasn't done in time for the quarter to be completed. It was completed after the end of the quarter, so it wasn't reflected in those numbers, but we feel that's been rectified since then.
And how many customers do you have in Quebec?
Quebec, we don't have any customers yet. We're close on a few scenarios. We're working with those engagements, but we just did close 2 in the French marketplace, which we're excited about. The opportunity for that is very big.
I don't even know how many hospitals we have in Quebec. You may.
There's probably about 150 hospitals in the Quebec market. Yeah. It's small. Depends how you consider a hospital, but probably that many.
So how since you have you did a financing quite recently?
About a couple of years ago, yes.
A couple of years ago, and how is your cash flow equilibrium right now?
We ramped up our expenses. That's why we raised the capital to start using the cash for international distribution. But we haven't altered on those expense sides while the revenue has been catching up to those expenses. So we're expecting to turn those corners in the next little imminent while and into where we were before we raised the capital, into a profitable state. We're still left with a large reserve of cash that we still have, depending on the quarter, because it's cyclical on our renewals, and between 1.5 to 2 million of cash seems to be available, and we don't expect to be using that. We've ramped up our international channels, and we're waiting for those channels to kick in now, and they're starting to.
So when do you what should convince an investor to buy in your stock right now at the price where it is? It's very low. It's higher than it was in 2011, 12, 13, and 14. It's actually close to the top right now. And do you expect your stock to increase? Do you expect it to become more volatile? Are you doing lots of promotion?
I think when you look at the valuations of the healthcare IT market on a U.S. or a global perspective, and you look at companies with unique IP, which we've demonstrated, and you look at the valuations that are being given both to the public and to the private, we're considerably lower in terms of what our valuations. A multiple of revenue for a company like us is the common form that people use to assess that. And we're, at current rate, it's about a 1.5 times revenue types valuations. When you look comparatively in the market, it's extremely low relative to the technology sector and where it sits. We're 80% recurring, as you said, with a 90% renewable base with our expense ratio, and we're starting to work into international markets. We're 2-3 deals away from making enormous profits, or not enormous profits, but starting to make profits, and the margins are there in the software, and we expect that to continue. So if someone digs into what our revenue base is conservative and how it works in annual recurring, it's a strong business model.
Well, I mean, in Quebec, as you said, the market isn't very, very big. So where do you think you will focus most of your energy in 2015?
2015, we have multiple products within the space. So just if you take the upsell opportunity, our install base, the growth is there just for that. UK is a big form of the marketplace. UK marketplace is 2.5 times the Canadian marketplace, and we're entrenched in there. We've put out some recent press releases announcing funding programs where the NHS, which is the health agencies within the UK market, are funding clinical utilization review. So they understand the value of it, they understand the necessity of it, and they're incentivizing their hospitals tremendously to get involved with these technologies. So we're seeing a lot of activity in those marketplaces.
So based on your experience so far in the company, what is the usual scenario? We know there aren't many new hospitals, so it's probably not your first target because a hospital takes time to be built, and there are lots of new ones. So what's the typical scenario? People are using some of your competitor and changing for you, or hospitals that don't even have a system like that? And
it's 100% the latter. Hospitals do not have a system that uses clinical criteria in the patient flow business. There are patient flow other solutions that are used, but when it comes to using clinical criteria, it's a brand new concept. 50% of Canada uses it, but internationally it's a very new concept.
I hardly understand what you mean when you're talking about clinical criteria. What do you mean exactly with that?
We assess every patient using evidence-based guidelines, research that's been done to prove if the patient is stable. Are they supposed to be there, or are not they supposed to be there? Those criteria that are determining the appropriateness of the patient for that setting are the clinical criteria. A lot of research, a lot of guidelines. It's our IP, it's our intellectual property, and those are clinical guidelines. So those questions that the frontline nurse asks themselves and documents into our system, if that patients are appropriate. We then flag the patient and say, you know, that patient is clinically stable. They should not be in a hospital setting, or they should be in an alternative setting.
So you mean I got an operation and I'm at the hospital, and if they filled correctly all of the criteria in your software,
that's right,
your software is going to tell them, oh, you should let go this guy, is perfectly okay now?
That's 100% it. We say you're now at the end of the day, the doctor does make the discharge. We want quality, we want safety. There's lots of reasons the doctor may not give the discharge. You might be clinically stable, but there's no one at home to take care of you. You're still sitting in a hospital setting. They can't knock down, they cannot send you unless you have a safe transition. This allows them to work faster to get a safe transition. Maybe you're clinically stable, but the doctor wants one last MRI test, so they want to make that test. But it takes 2 days to get that test while you're still occupying a bed at $1,200 a day in terms of cost, while the emergency room is backed up and a hospital's being crowded. So we want to move them effectively, and we want some common knowledge and some data so that hospital operationally moves that patient much more effectively. No one uses clinical criteria to do that.
I wish they would all do, because even though in my own clinic I'm going to a very prestigious clinic, and still when I go see my doctor, he has my pile of paper and he's looking at what happened to me in the last few months like that on his paper. They're always supposed to put all of that on computer, and they could actually see any changes that are happening. But I'm glad I can see this in hospital already. But is there any connections in between the two that you're planning 100%. There, more development on it?
A lot of hospitals, or most hospitals today, would use electronic health record-based systems. We integrate with those systems as part of the implementation plan, so we streamline the simplicity and the use of that. So we try to work with their existing systems so that we get some integration points, and we effectively have I've done a lot of work in that area to get that accomplished, for sure.
Maybe you can hook up to the Quebec program too, if one day they finally make it.
Quebec has a big need for our solutions, and I know they're going some very positive reforms, and we're excited to be part of that, and we do have some scenarios where we are going to be part of that.
Yeah, medical is so complex. There are so many criteria. How deep do you go into criteria? Doesn't it become a lot of work for the personnel?
It's about a 3-minute assessment every day. It's a pretty simple assessment. It's pretty rapid in terms of the work that
per customer,
per patient. They do
patient.
Per patient every day. So we assess every patient in every bed every day, at least once, and we determine the appropriateness of that setting. And we look at the barriers and delays, and we help the hospitals knock them down faster so that they can move through a safe transition. A hospital is, we know two things about hospitals. Patients don't want to be there, and hospitals don't want to be there, and a hospital is not a safe spot. We need to get the patients moved quicker through there, because for safety reasons as well as for cost reasons.
Exactly. So you may get in when you go to the hospital. You may get something you did not have when you get in first.
100%, and we're excited to bring this internationally. The 2 deals we just got in France are great. One of them is with a very large, privately based European hospital chain called Capio. great opportunity for growth in that. So we're demonstrating the uses there. We've done work in Australia. We continue to do work in the UK, and we think there's a huge opportunity for this to go international.
There's only a half a minute to go on the interview, but you were talking about this first system, but you also have another system that allow hospital to exchange information each other and share the information.
Yeah. We have a couple different systems. We have a compliance and education, which is a smaller part of our business, but is a very accretive part of our business. So we maintain it, and we do some good work in it.
Do you have two or three systems?
Two platforms. We have the compliance education, but the big...
And what's the revenue model of each in percentage right now?
I'm going to say patient flow is about 70 to 80% of our revenue.
Oh, okay.
And the other side is a smaller portion. So most of our business comes from our patient flow with the focus on that clinical criteria-based solution.
Very well. So we'll be watching your stock in the short future. So far, the healthcare side of the market has been very, very active in the last few years. So we wish you a very good luck, and we hope you're going to beat a few of your competitors there.
We hope so too. We think it's a great opportunity, and we're always open to discuss it.
Mr. Matlow, thank you very much.
Thank you.